Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today, something cheerful awaits you again from an old acquaintance of our podcast, the master of English humor, whom we already know from Three Men in a Boat and Three Men on the Bummel. They and I, by Jerome K. Jerome, published in the year 1909. This time, we are not going traveling, but out into the country, into a tumbledown cottage, and straight into the middle of a family in which a father is hopelessly outmatched by his 3 children. It is a story of the simple life, which turns out to be anything but simple. Make yourself comfortable, let go of the day, and smile with me at the follies of family life. I had bought a house. It stood in the country. It was old, it was falling apart, and it possessed in rich measure that quality which house agents describe as character, and which in practice means that the doors will not shut and the smoke will not go up the chimney. I intended to have it rebuilt, and sat one evening with my family to discuss the plans. My family consists of my wife, whom in my thoughts I call the little mother, and of 3 children. There is Dick, my son, who is at university, and for whom, between terms, there is nothing more important to be done than, as he himself puts it, to loaf about. There is Robina, my elder daughter, an energetic creature who makes every affair in this world her own within 10 minutes, and who falls into speeches of a persuasive force that I have not yet learned to resist. And there is Veronica, the youngest, a child of about 10, dreamy, in her thoughts always elsewhere, and possessed of a persistent inability to learn anything whatever. Her governesses are in the habit of leaving us after about a year, with the remark that their conscience does not permit them to stay any longer, for they have the feeling that they are not earning their salary. Not that Veronica is stupid, they always assure us. She merely appears to take nothing in. My wife is of the opinion that it is sinking in and will come out one day. On that evening, then, we spoke of the rebuilding, of guest rooms and kitchens and where the staircase ought to go, and my children interrupted me incessantly with proposals of their own, all of which contradicted one another. And in this confusion, Robina took the floor. She had, as it turned out, a plan. While the rebuilding of the big house was going on, so she set forth, we might live in the small, ramshackle cottage that stood on the same grounds, a little house of 6 rooms. And there, she said, we would lead the simple life. Robina spoke for a quarter of an hour, and when she had finished, the thing appeared to me an uncommonly beautiful idea. So it always goes with me and Robina. She painted the simple life for us in the most glorious colors. She herself would cook. She would rise early, milk the cow, and gather the morning egg. We would learn to provide for ourselves quite plainly and primitively. For Veronica, it would be the best thing that could happen to her. Higher education could wait. One ought for once to give the higher ideals a chance. Veronica would make the beds and sweep the rooms, and in the evening, so Robina described it, Veronica would sit with her little sewing basket and do quiet needlework while I told them things, and Robina herself would hover softly about as the good spirit of the house, and go about her work. Dick, so it further ran, might take lessons in practical farming from an English farmer, for an English farmer must surely know something. At this point, Robina paused to draw breath, and I noticed that I was already convinced. As for Dick, Robina had beforehand convinced him in 10 minutes that it was his life's dream to raise cattle in the forests of Canada, to gallop across prairies and carry canoes upon his back, and that the little mother and I would one day end our days with him, where we would sit a while in the sun and then peacefully pass away. Difficulties were made only by the little mother. That these three infants, as she still sees her children, should ever be capable of running a cottage of 6 rooms appeared to her a pretty but wholly unreal dream. I assured her that I should in any case be there 2 or 3 days of the week and keep an eye on everything. That did not reassure her either. She gave in only when Robina solemnly vowed to telegraph her instantly should Veronica so much as cough once. On Monday, then, we packed a 1-horse cart with what we considered indispensable. Dick and Robina went on ahead with their bicycles, and Veronica made herself comfortable on the tailboard, propped up by all manner of bedding. I myself followed on Wednesday by train. What woke me on the first morning was the cow. I did not know at the time that it was our cow. I did not know at all that we possessed a cow. I looked at my watch. It was 2:30. The cow was evidently standing immediately outside my window and expressing herself with a persistence and a volume that I should not have credited to an animal of that kind. Later, I learned that Robina had bought her, entirely in the spirit of the simple life, for to the simple life, as she had explained, a cow simply belongs. As to the milking, it turned out that Robina possessed the intention, but no practical knowledge whatever, and the cow, who evidently sensed this, behaved accordingly. With the cooking, too, it was a matter of its own. Robina had set about it with great zeal, and on that first day there was to be duck, together with a pie, peas, and potatoes. I must admit that everything looked promising when I came through the kitchen. The duck lay on the table, the pie stood in the oven, the peas and potatoes were boiling away, and Veronica was up to her elbows in pea pods. Dick had gone into town to fetch all manner of things, and I withdrew to work. What happened in the meantime, I have only been able to reconstruct from Robina's later accounts. She had had everything ready, she explained. She had grown hot, and she had believed she could trust Veronica for a while to keep an eye on things. She went out to take the air. What Veronica did during this time remained obscure, but when Robina returned, there was nothing left of the duck, the pie, and the entire midday meal that a human being would have wished to consume. The oven had done thorough work. When Dick came home, hungry as a wolf, and asked after dinner, Robina exploded. There ensued one of those altercations customary between brother and sister, in which each holds up to the other his entire character, and at the end of which all 3 of us ate bacon. So began our simple life. After we had consumed the bacon, Robina declared that what the cottage needed was expert assistance, and that at once. She charged Dick to go into town and hunt up a plumber, a carpenter, a bricklayer, a glazier, and a civil engineer, and to see to it that these set out without delay. Together, she thought, these gentlemen would surely be capable of accomplishing what was necessary, but the main thing was that the work should be begun without postponement. With that began that phase of our country life in which the house was populated by workmen. I have learned a thing or two in the course of my life about dealing with workmen, and the most important is this. A workman never comes on the day on which he is promised to come, and when he does come, he comes at the moment when one can least make use of him, and he brings all his tools with him except the one he needs for the work in question. The plumber appeared, examined the water pipes, drew the air in through his teeth, and declared that the whole thing was quite impossible, that this was how it had been done 40 years ago, and that nowadays one did it differently. The carpenter came, examined the plumber's work, and declared that the whole thing was quite impossible. The bricklayer came and expressed himself about the carpenter's work in a similar sense. Meanwhile, the rebuilding of the big house went its course, or rather, it did not go it. For there, the same thing was playing itself out, only on a larger scale. I had an architect who made me splendid drawings on which everything looked very simple, and a builder who examined the drawings and explained to me that, as it was drawn here, it could on no account be done. Between the two of them, there developed a relationship of a coolness that did not diminish in the course of the summer, and I stood between them and learned that a man who rebuilds a house must reconcile himself to the fact that the thing takes longer, costs more, and turns out differently than he had imagined, and that every attempt to struggle against it only makes the matter worse. Meanwhile, we came to know country life and its inhabitants. In the country, one must understand, one is never alone. In town, a man may live in a house for years without learning who lives next door. In the country, within a week, everyone for 5 miles around knows not only who you are, but also what you had for dinner and why the cow bellowed so on Thursday. One is called upon. Ladies appear in carriages and leave cards, and one must return the calls, and woe to him who fails to do so. Robina, who knows the laws in such matters, saw to it that we did what was needful. Veronica, meanwhile, went her own ways, as she always does. Veronica's relationship with water is of a kind that I am not rightly able to explain. It is enough to let her out of the house on a fine summer's day in clean clothes, and within an hour she is wet, and no one, not even she herself, can say how it came about. With animals, too, she is on familiar terms. She brought frogs into the house, which she kept in drawers, and once a hedgehog, which wandered through the cottage at the nocturnal hour and robbed all the inhabitants of their sleep. When one calls Veronica to account, she looks at one with her great eyes and is evidently so far away in her thoughts that every reproach goes into the void. The little mother maintains that this is the disposition of a child who will one day become something quite out of the common. I, for my part, have reconciled myself to the fact that I shall not live to see it. And Robina conducted her regime. Robina has the gift of knowing at once in every situation what is to be done, and she informs one of it as well. Between her and Dick there prevailed that state of continual friction which exists between brother and sister, who are, in truth, very much attached to each other, as is shown by the fact that they ally themselves instantly the moment a third party interferes. And this third party is, as a rule, myself. There came the day on which we had a social appearance to accomplish, and Robina determined that for this purpose we should hire a carriage. I had objected that in the country one does such things on foot, but Robina explained that much depends upon the first impression. She accordingly selected from Old Glossop an open landau of extraordinary size, painted yellow. To me, the vehicle appeared better suited to the procession of a mayor than to the needs of a Christian family. But Robina showed herself sensitive on this question, and I said nothing further. Roomy it was, without a doubt. Old Glossop had turned it out well, with a pair of greys before it. The only thing that did not quite suit me was the coachman, a fellow whom I should sooner have expected on a milk cart. So we set ourselves in motion. Veronica, who had been in disgrace the whole morning, sat stiffly on the extreme edge of her seat and assumed the bearing of a person who has done with this world. Dick wore lavender gloves that Robina had procured for him. Robina herself shared a parasol with her mother, which the two of them had to hold almost horizontally before them, which took away their view. At first I did not understand why the people smiled as we drove past. Apart from the carriage, which they must surely have seen before, we offered, so I should have thought, no diverting spectacle. A group of cyclists laughed out loud. Robina remarked on this that in the country one must take care that the strong air and the solitude do not rob one of one's wits. She had observed that country people are inclined to premature imbecility. I did not share her concern, for I had meanwhile discovered what was amusing the people. Dick had found behind the cushions a large, tastefully bound prayer book, evidently a relic of a recent wedding. He and Veronica sat there and held it solemnly between them. As soon as the parasol was lowered, the two of them followed the flight of the swallows with rapt devotion. Robina declared that she would complain to Mr. Glossop about the insults to which decent people were exposed in his carriage. In time, I discovered that my son Dick had fallen in love. One notices such a thing. He grew thoughtful, which is unusual in him. He rose early of his own accord, which is more unusual still. And he began to take an interest in his clothes, which, in a young man who had until then been of the opinion that a suit is something one wears until it falls apart, amounts to a revolution. It was a girl from the neighborhood, a sensible, pretty creature, and I had nothing to object against her. But the matter set me pondering, and I fell into those reflections which a father in such situations does not escape. One wishes the boy happiness, and at the same time one would like to preserve him from it. One remembers one's own young years, and the ladies after whom one once ran oneself, and one thanks heaven in silence for the girls who refused one in those days, for had any one of them said yes, life would have run otherwise, and, as one now comprehends, decidedly worse. Only the young man does not know this, and one cannot tell him either. If one tells him, he takes one for an old fool who has never loved, and so one keeps silent. I spent many an evening thinking about marriage, and about men, and about women, and about how little the one comprehends of the other. And the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became to me that I did not comprehend it. The young man marries an ideal, and discovers afterward that he has married a human being, and the young girl does the same, and if both are wise, they settle down to it and discover that a human being is the better company than an ideal. For with an ideal, one cannot breakfast. All this I laid before Robina, who listened to me with an expression of polite forbearance, and then explained to me that I understood nothing whatever about the matter, and that the young people of today do it quite differently, in which she was, without a doubt, right. The summer went by, and one day, as unexpectedly as everything that has to do with workmen, the big house was finished. It looked different from what I had imagined. It had cost more than I had estimated, and it had taken longer than I had been promised, and the staircase was not where it had been on the drawings. But there it stood, and it was our house, and as I stood before it and regarded it, I felt that quiet contentment which comes over a man who has brought a thing to its end, no matter how it has turned out. We moved in, and the simple life in the cottage was at an end. Robina declared that at bottom she had always known it would come to this, and that she was glad we had it behind us. For now, at least, we knew what the simple life was worth. Dick thought it had been quite nice, especially the cow. Veronica did not express herself, but was, as usual, elsewhere in her thoughts. And when I now look back on that summer, I must say, nothing in particular happened. A house was rebuilt, a dinner was burned, a cow bellowed at 2:30 in the morning, a boy fell in love, and a father came once again to the recognition that he understands less of his children than his children understand of him. But perhaps life consists for the greater part of such things, and the great events for which we are all waiting are rarer than we suppose, and less important. We sit together in the evening, they and they talk, and I listen, and now and then I say something which they all declare to be nonsense, and then we laugh. And when I look at them so, these three, who were once children and now are so no longer, then I think that I ask for nothing further, and that it is a good life, when one considers it rightly, and that all the plans I ever made were not worth much, and that in the end it has turned out quite well as it has turned out, and without any doing of mine. That was our short retelling of They and I by Jerome K. Jerome. A cheerful story of a tumble-down house, of the simple life that is nothing of the sort, and of a father who is hopelessly outmatched by his family and feels very much at ease about it. Good night. And if you like, we'll hear each other again tomorrow, here at Sleepy Classic Tales.